When the skies were dark and the heavens unguarded, when the moon lay silent in the broken earth, when mortals languished between an infernal lash, then did scattered souls flee the grasp of the cruel gods. At the very threshold of IOTH's Academy of Magic did they gather, refugees from conquered tribes and nations, liberated prisoners, and defiant expatriates. In the golden shadow of great magic they built their homes, clinging to whatever light they could find. And here, among the scattered and the shattered, does our tale continue. Hello everyone, welcome to Book of Dawn, IOTH Academy. I'm Torment by Gnomes. I'll be your game master this evening. Joining us is Crowan, who I'm really excited to have on the show. Crowan, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Oh, excited to get to play more D&D. But yeah, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Crowan. I do casting for a few games, TFT, Here's the Storm, Eternal Return being being those main few. Hoping to branch out into some more as time goes on. Maybe some Pokemon Unite, that's checking that one out. But yeah, just excited to be here. True.
TOs, call him.
Yeah.
Crowan has been on the show before. We did a Runeterra one shot with
Yeah.
Doa and some folks. But now he'll be joining us as the third member of the cast for IOTH Academy. Crowan, why don't you tell us just like the absolute bare bones, since we're going to meet your character in a moment, just what's your character's name and like one or two things about him?
Oh, okay. Character's name is Alexander Cal's Blythe. One or two things about him. He is a very, I would say, like timid and shy person, kind of hard to like really, trust people because, world's a big mess and there's not a lot of, reason to get super maybe not reason to get super attached, but it's hard to get super attached to a certain
Mm.
few. But definitely likes learning. If like any new information he's presented with finds like strikes a fancy, he'll kind of like cling on to it and kind of like romanticize it and want to like figure out more about it. But yeah, it's a couple things I think.
Excellent. When we first meet Alexander, the camera soars in from above, from a vast, wide plain, sort of just at the feet, at the foothills, just at where the foothills and the lowlands of mountains that rise towards the north, where those places meet, there is a light that shines throughout the night, through the day, and under the hot desert sun, it glistens. It's an enormous golden sphere, hundreds, maybe thousands of feet in diameter. And inside this sphere of impenetrable golden glass soar metal spires, floating islands, trees and forests and woods, lakes that spin and float with no basin underneath them, all sorts of incredible magical wonders within this sphere. And spreading out like a shadow, even though it emits light, as if it cast a shadow in its blast radius, are stacks and stacks of homes and hovels and buildings that have risen up over the years, over the decades, perhaps even centuries, of people living just at the threshold of this magical wonder. The buildings rise up and pile with no clear order, no master plan, just wherever people could build them. And as the camera flies down in from above and starts to move through these ramshackle streets that lean precariously towards each other with one home built on top of another, all manner of people can be found looking out the windows, pushing through the streets, through the uneven alleyways and cobblestones. There are tribes of wind dwarves. There are humans that speak a dozen different languages from a dozen different lands. There's the occasional Holdra dusk elf. There are dragonborn, clearly marked with the scales of their forebears, walking proudly in groups through the streets. In this camp, this town, this settlement that's built up over the years, all sorts of different foods are being cooked because here have gathered refugees and survivors from centuries of infernal oppression. Those who have escaped from the lash and the cruel iron will of Uzul the Destroyer and Anachronis the Eschaton Clock, from the wild ravagers of Tillabek, all of those who have gathered here together, and they've brought with them what little they had, what little that they could, and what survived. They brought with them stories of their homelands, of their gods, recipes from far off lands, fighting techniques, crafts, language. All of these have mixed and melded here. And throughout the streets, from time to time, the golden barrier at the edge of the sphere, which does sort of come down, the very bottom of the sphere is not visible. It sinks into the earth itself. But where the sphere reaches its smallest is the threshold. And from time to time, groups of wizards bearing the golden robes of IOTH's Academy will walk out in numbers, in force, protected by guards, walking through the streets, trying to make some sort of a difference with their magic, resolving disputes, cleaning up piles of waste, and just taking care of hygiene, enacting repairs. And it is in this environment that we first come face to face with Alyxander, a boy of indeterminate age who's never known any life except this camp and these people. Any friends that he's made have run these same streets with him, these alleyways, these unplanned ramshackle pathways. And though his exact age is indeterminate, he's probably somewhere between 9 and 11, somewhere in that territory. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what he looks like and what he's wearing?
Yeah, sure. So Alexander is very scrawny. I think build has kind of like some unkempt dark brown hair that goes probably a bit down below the shoulders. Kind of like a very, very slightly tanned skin. Kind of average height for his age, I think. Probably some streaks of dirt like smeared on his face and hands. It's like sometimes when he doesn't want to be seen, he like ducks and darts out and kind of like scrambles out of the way of things. Like probably when these wizards come through, he like will be curious, so like he'll try to get a peek of them, but then kind of like if they look his way, he'll like scramble back into some hiding spot or something like that.
All right. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to roll for your ability scores. Now,
All right.
I didn't have Necra roll. I had her pick from the elite array, so she has earned an off-camera reroll if she wants it. The way this is going to work, you're going to roll 4d6 6 times, and each time you're going to drop the lowest of the 4. You may already know that, but our chat may not. You're going to go ahead and do that 6 times, and I think I lost you. One moment, please. Welcome back, everybody. There's a slight possibility that Crowan has somehow invoked the wrath of Vindur, Sovereign of the Skies, which sucks because he hasn't even done anything yet.
Yeah. Oh well.
So we were going to have you go ahead and randomly roll your ability scores. So,
Yeah.
and someone in chat last time told me there's a way to make Roll20 do this automatically. There's some sort of a code you can put into chat that'll make it drop the lowest.
Yeah, I know of it. I'm
Sweet,
ready. I'm
sweet. You
there.
have the
Got the tech.
The forbidden tech. Excellent.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and start getting those numbers out. And while you do that, I'm just gonna.
Behold, an act of God.
Okay.
We're off to a fun start. All right, we're going to start with these ability scores, and then I'm going to go ahead and read this act of God for us. So we have 8, 13, 12, 10, 13, 17. That's really not bad at all. I think we're just going to go ahead and stick with that.
Not bad. We take
So
those.
here's what we're going to do. Open up your character sheet and
Yep.
assign those ability scores as you will. For
Sure.
the class that you'll be taking, which again, you may already know this, charisma is the most important stat. And another
Yeah.
thing to note is that we're using alternate ancestry rules. We're using Grazilax's Guide to Ancestry.
Okay,
So
dope.
you're a human, you'd normally get +1 to all your stats. You're not going to get that. Instead, the background you select for your character is going to modify your stats.
Okay.
Now, everyone's doing the same thing, so put your scores wherever you want, but don't feel the need to absolutely min-max, because this is going to be a very, story, role-play intensive
I'm just
adventure.
tempted to like take them down the line, honestly. I think I'm gonna
That
do
seems
that.
fine. That
It
seems
just,
100% fine.
it fits. Yeah, it's
If
there
you
we
did
go.
3d6 down the line, that would be the original way that
Yeah.
characters were created back in the day.
That's a lot more hardcore, but
Yep.
the 4d6 checklist down the line.
So the act of God we drew for our audio listeners is a green symbol with a snake on it. The title of the card is Knowledge of the Ages, and the text is a scrap of knowledge from a forgotten sage. Already the voices of the Infernals whisper to our hero. So while you set up your ability scores, this is not something that Alyxander would know.
Okay.
But one of the Infernals, the cruel gods who have dominion over the land, is Zethius, the serpent. Zethius is a hoarder of knowledge, a keeper of forbidden secrets, tempting always with information, control of information, access to information. Followers of Zethius hope to uncover secrets that will give them power and to deny that information to everybody else. Now, I have an idea for how the serpent might already be interfering in your life. Do you have any suggestions before I hit us with this?
No, I'm down to hear yours. Sounds like you got a pretty pretty spicy thing lined up already, so.
All right. So it is not to Alyxander that the serpent whispered, but to his parents. For though in the refugee camp starvation is rare, the magic of IOTH's Academy is just kind of barely able to keep supply chains going to provide a little bit of that magical abundance. Neither has Alyxander can probably count the number of times he's felt really full on 2 hands in his life.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Checks
often
out.
go to bed starving, but rarely goes to bed with a full stomach. His parents, as they sort of watch him just, play out in the street, running around, being a kid, watching the procession of wizards go by and then hiding as it withdraws. His parents are Miranda and Arthas. Arthas he's got sort of a twisted back from years of hard labor. He's missing several of his teeth. But whenever there's a community gathering, he knows all sorts of dances from his homeland, which he doesn't really talk about very much. As for Miranda, his partner, she used to be a sailor on the high seas until something happened to her crew. And she'll still tell stories about those days. And she plays a stringed instrument while Arthas will dance. And the two of them, I feel like Alyxander has always grown up, he's always felt loved growing up. They've cared about him. They've done their best for him. They met here in the refugee camp, but they have always been worried about him and about the kind of life that he's going to live. And somehow, perhaps in a dream, perhaps in a whisper, perhaps a scrap of paper passed to them, or a stranger they met in an alleyway whose face they could not see, they learned of a rite, a spell, an incantation. They learned of this the night Alexander was born. A stranger came unto them and told them that if ever they wanted a better life for their child, if they were willing to pay the price, gave them a spell, a set of words, an incantation they could call upon. But when our story begins, they have not yet invoked it, but
Hmm.
the serpent has already spoken,
I love it.
and we'll go from there. All right. So we've got our ability scores here: an 8 in strength, 13 dexterity, 12 constitution, 10 intelligence, 13 wisdom, and a 17 charisma. So how does this reflect on what Alexander is like, and like what sort of relationships he has in the camp aside from his parents, and what he spends his days doing? Tell me how these scores impact who he is.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, lowest score, 8 in strength, doesn't necessarily always get a hearty meal, is kind of on the scrawnier side. Doesn't really have to get into, or like wants to avoid scraps or anything like that as much as possible. Doesn't really wants to shy away from physical altercation. That can happen with kids, obviously, a lot of times, but he just wants to more scramble away, and that's where I guess the dex comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
But there's probably some times where he couldn't get away, and so he's was roughed up a little bit. Sometimes things didn't always go his way, so he's kind of been his constitution, I suppose. He's been able to take a couple hits. They didn't knock him down. He got back up again and
They're never going to
scrambled
keep
away
him down.
after. Yeah, exactly. Um, Intelligence, I suppose, is average. Is a curious person, but isn't like super super smart. I suppose he sometimes does some dumb things. Curiosity might get the best of him sometimes, but
Also, neither of
always,
his parents really come from an educated background. He's
yeah.
he's living right next to the greatest center of learning, except maybe for Irelek in the world, but that's neither here nor there. But it's not like he has a huge amount of access to that information. The outreach that the academy sends out is usually just basic humanitarian aid. It's not like they're teaching kids to read and such. So,
Yeah.
you know, but carry on.
Yeah, and I think, oh, actually, for the wisdom, I think so. Alexander oftentimes likes to find himself. It's probably like a weekly or like bi-weekly occurrence. There's like an older woman in the refugee camp, probably goes by, I think, the name of old Ramona, and she tells a lot of stories. And they're like way out there, kind of like, can you believe that that would actually happen kind of stories, but they always seem to have some sort of like moral to them or some like lessons while they're entertaining and like fantastical,
Mm-hmm.
and people are like, maybe that actually happened, who knows, but they always teach some sort of a lesson. And that's where I think Alexander is kind of he's taken those sometimes to heart and like really values hearing her tell these stories, and so I think has picked up a little bit of wisdom from kind of thinking deeper about the messages that they might actually trying to be conveying from her.
Does she tell old stories about the dragon gods, about the sovereigns and the titans, about the queens of the four seasons, or about the dawn era?
In my mind, it's like pretty much anything and everything. Like she'll seem
Mm-hmm.
to have a story for like actually anything, and whether it's true or not, no one seems to know, or at least Alexander doesn't know, but seems to have stories upon stories upon stories about like anything that like most of Alexander's like knowledge of like the world has probably come from either like the parents' teachings or
Mm-hmm.
something like to where she like got into his head and got some idea, and probably oftentimes he'll go home and like ask his parents like, "Oh, did this happen?" And like maybe sometimes they'll know, but oftentimes they'll probably be like, "I don't know." Like that's crazy.
Sure, might as well. That might as
Yeah.
well happen. All right, awesome. So, and then that 17 in charisma, how did that
Yeah.
express itself in his upbringing?
I think, hmm, while Alexander doesn't have a lot of people that he would regard as, I guess, as like very close friends, he's able to be kind of like a I would say like a passable like niceness with like most everybody he interacts with. Like, sure, there's gonna be, you know, some asshole kids or some people that like are kind of neutral, but generally he's just like a likable kid, and people generally just like, you know, uh I suppose I'll say just like when they have interactions with him, they have a generally positive impression. He's very
Hmm.
like easy to get along with kind of person.
All right, cool. So one of the ways that he survives is by going with the flow, being agreeable, being generally likable.
Yeah. And tries his hardest to be that, like, doesn't wanna
Hmm.
be the person to, like, spark a conflict in any ways, like, wants to avoid that as really as much as
Hmm.
possible.
An understandable trauma response. All right,
Yeah.
let's move on to the next part. So, with Grazilax's Guide to Ancestry, as a human, you get a couple of special abilities, and you get to pick from amongst them.
Okay.
The first thing is that you speak the common tongue. So, under your languages, I'll just go ahead and throw common in there.
Sure.
And you speak one other language. Now, there are all sorts of languages are spoken in the camp. Just, it's literally a melting pot of different cultures. There
Yep.
are dwarves, there's elves, gnomes, halflings. There are folk there who speak giant. There are a lot of folk there who are refugees from the 10 dragon tribes of Okarthel, ruled by dragons. That's one of the few cultures that has not been conquered by the Infernals or their minions. And a lot of the dragonborn in the area are like their particular areas were conquered, but for the most part, they're stories of this great, these 10 different tribes that are still fighting back and defiant. They have powerful magic. And so a lot of people in the camps speak Draconic. It's actually a fairly common language.
Mhm.
On the other side, the primordial tongue is the holy language of a lot of the gods, a lot of the elemental gods. And worship of Zalar, the sun rider, the phoenix god, is Zalar seen as this beacon of hope against the Infernals. And on the other side, out to the west, the great solar empire of Brontha has also resisted conquest. And a lot of the folks in the camp are sort of turning to the worship of Zalar as a sign of, again, of hope. Their homelands
Mhm.
have been conquered, but the sun god might be able to get them back for us because it's resisting the darkness. And there's a lot of very proud worshippers of Zalar, people who are sort of affiliated with, oh, Brontha's great, Brontha's going to bail us out. So a lot of folks in the camp speak primordial. Um, Now, your parents aren't really taking sides in all of this. They're not saying, "Oh, the dragons are going to save us." They're not really saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, the titans are going to save us." They're just living their lives, trying to manage their own, just taking care of you. What language do you think? Oh, and also, IOTH Academy is run by elves, Alfar, Dawn Elves, so the elven language is fairly common. What
Okay.
additional language would Alexander have picked up?
I would say probably Draconic. In my mind, like going back to the storytelling lady, old Ramona, she probably speaks Draconic quite frequently, whether it just be like rambling
Sweet.
to herself or to other people. Like kind of picked it up from her,
Hmm.
I think, and tries to practice it a little bit. So I would say
Okay,
Draconic.
awesome. So, functionally in game he's fluent, but roleplay wise his draconic is a little bit
Yeah,
a work
a
in
little iffy.
progress. All right, I like that. uh, Now as a child you are actually small size. You only move at 25 feet instead of 30 feet because you got them little legs.
Yeah.
uh, but you can squeeze through somebody else's square. You can just like run underneath them. And if anybody scores a hit on you, I'll add this to your character sheet later. If anyone scores a crit against you, they have to roll a saving throw or pull their punch involuntarily because, who would stab a kid? That's a monstrous
Yeah.
thing to do. So you have a few
All
other
right.
specials for still being so young, which will pass as time goes on. But as a human, you get the special ability Adaptive. Once per short rest, you can add a d4 to any d20 roll that you make.
Okay.
And you can do that even if you roll and you failed, you can say, I'm spending that, I'm throwing that in there. So that's sort of your major ability. But you also get to pick, since you were raised in an urban environment, you get to pick 4 of the following. So the first is Child of the Alleys. which means that you get your proficiency bonus on survival checks you make to navigate cities, and you make those with advantage. You just know your way around cities.
Okay.
The second is Crowd Mover, which lets you move through an opponent's space without provoking an attack of opportunity as long as there's somebody else within 5 feet of them. Now, you don't really need this as a kid, but as you grow up, that could be something handy. The third is Arm Twister. You get proficiency in either persuasion or intimidation. That was the third. The fourth is Deft Maneuvers, which gives you proficiency either in acrobatics or stealth. And finally, Artisan, you get proficiency with one type of artisan's tools. So thinking about Alexander's upbringing, you get to pick 4 of these. What are your thoughts so far?
Okay, definitely, the navigating the cities and alleys, because I think that even comes into play in navigating the refugee camp in terms of when the wizards come through and trying to, duck behind things and also running away from confrontation, has found is his way around the camps, probably better than most other, at least, kids his age, probably even better than most people. So, able to navigate locations pretty easily.
Excellent. I'm adding that to your character sheet. We'll do that for number 1. What about number 2?
All right. I would say as well, I think was it the def maneuvers one and like Prishy and stealth, I think
Okay.
that kind of those line up at least in my mind together, be able to hide from things as he needs to and navigating the cities, trying to find little hiding spots, knows how to be really quiet. Um it's probably def maneuvers as well.
Go ahead and check off proficiency in stealth on your character sheet.
Yeah, will do. Okay. And then adaptive was one of them, right?
Adaptive is a core ability
Or
you
is
get
the
no
that's
matter
the core
what.
one?
So
Okay,
again,
cool.
once per short rest, you can add a d4 to any d20 roll that you make. And I'll take care of adding that to your character sheet later, just so we don't slow things down.
Okay, sounds good. So okay, there was Child of Alleys, Crab Mover, Arm Twister, Death Maneuvers, and then what were the other ones after that
The
again?
last one was artisan. So
Oh,
you are
Artisan. So
proficient
4 out of
with
the
one
5.
type of artisan's tools. So you learned some sort of craft growing up.
Okay. Hmm. Um. I think I will also take the crowd mover.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for aforementioned reasons, I think they all kind of lead into having a similar skill set. Sometimes has to dodge through people in crowds because there weren't necessarily any like little spaces in the terrain to get through, and probably picked up a artisan tool from one of his parents. I think he said his mother Miranda was a sailor. Not
Mm-hmm.
exactly sure what tool, but probably something would have picked up from his parents at some time. I'll give some more thought to it
Yeah,
a bit down the line, but
I'll throw that on
yeah.
your character sheet and we'll think about it. And I'll see if there's a set of tools that makes sense for a sailor. I'm sure there's several.
Yeah.
Right. Excellent. Next, let's pick a background. Now, I'm already leaning extremely heavily, just based on everything you've said, towards the urchin background.
Yeah, that
Okay.
that makes sense.
Easy sell. Easy sell.
Already with you there for sure.
All right. So the urchin background is going to increase your dexterity by 2 and your
Okay.
charisma by 1. So you're going to have a 15 dexterity and an 18 charisma. That dovetails nicely, very nicely with what you're doing so far.
Done.
So I think we're in good shape. Excellent. All right. That also gives you a couple of other things. Let me pull up the background because you're going to pick up some skills off of this. So you can go ahead and take proficiency in sleight of hand,
All right.
and you would gain proficiency in stealth, but you already have that. So you can pick any other skill proficiency that you'd like right now.
Okay. I will say persuasion, generally being a easy person to get along with,
Mm-hmm.
and generally people have a more positive opinion of them. Easier to persuade people.
Perfect. That makes a ton of sense. You also gain proficiency in the following skill tools, which you can add at the bottom left of your character sheet under tool proficiencies and custom skills. disguise kit, and thieves' tools.
All right.
Now, if you don't want one of those, we can swap it around if it doesn't make sense. But otherwise, I'm thinking that there would have been some kids, some older kids, the bad kids in town. And when they're not beating you up, some of them would like take a liking to you and teach you how to pick locks and do stuff like that. Maybe they were your friends. Maybe they were trying to just, we're not friends, but I want you to have the skills to survive. Maybe they were just planning on using you as the fall guy in a heist. Who knows?
Yeah.
But we'll go ahead and throw those on there. And then you get the following items, which I'll go ahead and paste into chat as well. A small knife, a map of the city you grew up in, a pet mouse, a token to remember your parents by, a set of common clothes, and a pouch containing 10 gold pieces.
All right.
You also get the City Secrets feature, which I will throw on your character sheet right now. Which essentially means that whenever you're not in combat, you can sneakily navigate through any two locations in a city twice as fast as your speed would normally allow, because you know all sorts of secrets and shortcuts.
Yeah.
And for the purposes of this campaign, maybe not immediately, but definitely at some point, the academy will count as a city. So your
Okay.
character, once you spend some time there, you'll know secrets, you'll know shortcuts, secret passageways, stuff. You'll know
Yeah.
people who will let you in the staff only entrance, stuff like that.
Sounds very, very handy.
All right. Magnificent. So
I think.
you go ahead.
Okay. I was gonna say, I think for like the token to remember my parents by, probably some of the, like the tools that like my whatever the artisan tool set that
Mm-hmm.
my character's mother had probably would have like given that to me to like use. So I think that I can like double as the token.
Okay, I like that. I like that. Let's see if we can just hash out right now what sort of
Sure.
tools we want to work on. I'll see if I can find a list of tool proficiencies.
Yeah, let me look as well.
Let's see. Alchemist's kit doesn't fit. Brewer's supplies could fit. Calligraphy, probably not. Carpentry could definitely count. On a ship, you would have picked up some
Yeah.
whittling. Could have been the ship's carpenter. Cartographer skills to make maps. Cobbler's.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thinking either because the carpenters or the cartographers, because if knows how to navigate places, probably like in order to do that better, and I think actually might line up when we get into the academy setting, is
Mm-hmm.
like could be able to like note down like where if it passes by something thinks it's interesting, like maybe it's a passageway, like and like map it out and be able to
Mm-hmm.
refer to it as to be the reason why you can navigate things so fast. I think so. Just has a good like innate sense of just like direction and can
Mm-hmm.
map that down pretty easily.
That makes a lot of sense. I like the idea of his wherever he stays just being covered with maps. He just like whatever surface he can get his hands on, parchment, wax tablets, a wall
Yeah.
you can scratch on, just all these little maps and stuff. And when people first enter, they may not immediately understand everything because it's in his own shorthand. But if they do know, then it's the secrets of whatever space he's currently occupying.
Mm-hmm.
I like that as an idea. All right. From a very young age, you were raised here, you were born here. There are older kids who have been some of them are nice to you, some of them are mean, some of them running gangs, some of them, and at first it's very much just kids being somewhat unmanaged kids to a certain degree. Uh, some of them are bullies, some of them are just curious. And you've made it through your life this far inside the camp by vanishing, disappearing, or being, a wallflower, essentially, not making anyone mad.
Yeah.
And so I think most of the time you don't get beat up a lot. You usually stay out of trouble. Very sort of quiet, unassuming, but friendly. Does that all track so far?
Yeah, I'd say so.
All right. And a lot of times you'll sit in the sort of unofficial, it's not the town square because the refugee camp it's built up into a city and it's so large, it's been here for centuries. but it's a square, right? It's where a bunch of the buildings sort of come around each other. There's a well right there, so people are going to and from to get water. A lot of the hovels lean in to the point where you could practically pass something from one street to the next there. And it's a community gathering point. Your family lives very close to here, in a small hovel, probably like a second stack hovel of some kind in the shanty town. And that is where Ol Ramona sits and tells her stories. Is Ol Ramona a human?
Is Ramona a human? Maybe Ramona is a dragonborn. Yeah, let's go with that.
Cool. Cool. That's awesome. I like it. She has metallic scales that have started, they're this deep rich coppery color, but they started to get this like corrosion around the edges, this green, the way that old copper does, the way that old pennies do in the Statue of Liberty. They take on this green tint to it in her old age. And her clothes are simple, and she has a gnarled walking stick that she uses, and she sits by the well and tells stories in her voice that is clear, and it cuts across the alleyways, and all the children always recognize when she begins to speak. And a lot of her stories she's told stories about when Snor rode the glacier and crashed into the homes of the elves and put them into 100 years of war. And she's told stories about when the Infernals first came to Anacra and were defeated by the dragons, when the Laughing God opened the seven gates of the Silent City and smashed the Infernals and drove them from the land. And in each of her stories, they do contain morals, they do contain messages, and she's not super in your face with a lot of them. But the moral of most of them is don't kick down somebody else's door and take their stuff. Variations on that idea of respecting your neighbor and letting people keep their traditions, and accepting folks for who they are without trying to force your ways on them. And the problem with Ol Ramona's stories is that they tend to annoy people. And as a young kid, this did not make much sense to you. You would sometimes get even other Dragonborn, and not just Dragonborn, but the folks who run with the Dragonborn. They wear different colored sashes, a lot of blue sashes. A lot of the folks who come from the 10 dragon tribes of Okarthal here, they like blue a lot. They wear blue sashes and they carry spears with them, and they like to walk around in groups, looking very impressed with themselves. And you've learned to get out of their way. They're not usually mean, but they like to talk a lot, and they like to act like they're in charge. They like to act like they're in charge of keeping the peace. And if they think you're up to trouble, they'll get you in a corner, maybe not kick you, but at least it'll take up hours of your day. And even those folks will sometimes stand in the town square and sort of heckle her and talk about her stories and stuff. You never really understood as a kid why they did that. And then on the other side, you'd sometimes get people wearing the brilliant reds and robes, not really fine robes. The only finery in the camp is usually when IOTH's wizards walk in. They have just beautiful, magically crafted things. But on the other side, you've got the Zaelorians who will come in and they'll just interrupt her in the middle of her stories and be super rude. Not all of them, but there's like a group of the rowdy ones who will walk in. And sometimes when this happens, old Ramona usually just ignores the hecklers, doesn't even talk to them. She's telling stories to the kids who are like gathered around her. And when grown-ups approach from the edges, she just lets them talk. She acts like they're not there, and she just keeps laying out the stories in a very determined, steady voice.
Mm-hmm.
But more than once, fights have broken out. And not, people stabbing each other and killing each other in the streets fights, but people yelling, people getting into fist fights. And when that happens in the middle of old Ramona's stories, does Alexander usually just say, okay, time to leave? I guess I don't get to find out how this one ends. How does he usually respond?
Yeah, I would say if there's somewhere for him to get to, and probably it makes sense whereas he knows how to like navigate this place, he's probably found somewhere that's like relatively safe, that's still within earshot, maybe not within like eyesight, but still find somewhere to like kind of hide and still, if he can listen to it.
Hmm.
Sometimes it probably has gotten bad enough to where he has to like fully leave, but tries to tries to still stick around if at all possible. So
Hmm.
that's probably maybe like one or two like little nooks and crannies, like the backside of a building, maybe like climbs up a little bit onto like someone else's like home and like perches
Hmm.
on like a little like stoop or something like
Like
up
on the
there.
eve of another
Yeah.
shanty. All right, so he's got his little hiding spot. Does he go there when there's other sorts of trouble? Is that his go-to sanctum?
I think um when old Ramona is telling stories, he would be within like the main area, but more towards like the outskirts, so that if something were to break out, he'd be ready to just like go there, but doesn't
Hmm.
usually go there unless he has to. Into those that specific spot, I would say.
Okay. And usually on days when old Ramona's out there telling his stories is when he's gonna come home super, super late, right? He's gonna lose track of time, get lost in
Yeah.
things. Either
Oh yeah.
those times or times when there's a big scuffle in the streets and he's being extra careful to stay out of it. That's when he's gonna come home late. Uh, what's his relationship with his parents like? Again, Arthas has just been he's done hard labor his whole life. That's how he makes his living in the camp. He builds things, he hauls things. He's not like a super skilled craftsman. He's just got a strong if twisted back, and he's always made his life that way. And his mother is always looking out for the neighbors. She talks in a whisper, and she's got a gnarly scar across her throat. She talks in this very raspy whisper. Um, and I don't think that she fusses. This isn't really a life where you can afford to fuss over people, but
Yeah.
she's definitely always worried about him whenever he gets in a tussle and stuff. Tell me a little bit about his relationship with his parents.
I think that, I mean, let's think. It is a relationship where they like love and support him, but
Hmm.
it's very like obvious, I think, at some points that even to Alexander, that like just the quality of life is like taking a toll on his parents. Like
Hmm.
they want to, have wanted to like get out of the situation, achieve better things, but like they don't, and they're always that kind of like, it feels like half energy. So Alexander doesn't ever want to
Hmm.
like bother them for things or anything like that. He just kind of tries to be like as independent as possible, but
Hmm.
like wants to be still like respectful of them, and they support him and stuff. But um yeah, it doesn't like, sometimes we'll like share things of like the stories that he's heard when he's really excited about them, but
Hmm.
if it's like very clear that they're just like, having a rough day, he'll just like be quiet about things.
Hmm.
But he's still a good relationship though.
What does taking care of himself look like? At least in his, from when he was like 5 years old to whatever age he is now. What does that mean to him? How does he take care of himself?
Sometimes I think like trying to find like scraps of food to like make sure like he's like fed himself, so his
Hmm.
parents like maybe don't have to like super worry about like always providing him food. It'd be like, oh no, like I ate earlier kind of thing. Like they're like, where? He's like, like makes up like excuses of something, probably just like where he managed to procure like food.
Hmm.
Probably that. Hmm. I think he will when he like notices his parents like in activity, like he'll, if it makes sense for him to like try to like help out with it, like
Hmm.
he would. I think try to do that as well. Yeah.
From an early age, he's been cognizant of the fact that despite their efforts, despite the his father is always singing old songs from his homeland, which she barely ever talks about. Like he sings the songs in a language that is somewhat familiar, and he knows all the dances, and he'll teach you those, but he doesn't talk about where he came from.
Yeah.
Uh, and his mother, she's the one who, when she hears the stories that older Mona tells, she doesn't say they're preposterous. She has a tendency when she's in a good mood to try to one up them, to tell even bigger stories
Oh.
about monsters on the high seas and about Lee Bon who dwells beneath the waves and who, smashes any fiend that walks near the shores, and that's why they don't dare go on the water. They only go on the land. When she's in a good mood, she'll try to, that's nothing. I heard that, or I saw with my own eyes on the open waves, this and that, the other. But not every day. And it's not a good day when she blows off the story or gives you a "that's nice, honey," or "imagine that," something very dim. The
Yeah.
pall of despair has always been pressing down on your family, and they've not given in. They've resisted. They've held together with each other, with a small community that they formed. They've always made the effort to push back, but that weight, that crushing weight, is ever present. And from a far younger age than any child should have to be cognizant of that reality, Alexander has been aware. Perhaps,
Yeah.
perhaps he doesn't have a name for it. Perhaps he can't describe it. Perhaps he doesn't fully understand it, but he has felt that burden.
I think actually with that, it brings up a point of I'd like to, I think, change the proficiency and persuasion to insight. 'Cause I think with that, he's
Hmm.
become very aware of like judging other people's like emotions, kind of like where they're
Hmm.
at without actually like having to like ask, like interact with them, I think. So
I like that. That makes a lot of sense for the character. We'll go
yeah,
ahead and make that change.
yeah, I've done that.
Excellent. So he's got a lot of empathic tendencies where he's very
Yeah.
keyed into other people's emotions. And if there's someone important to him, he'll take actions to try to help them. Is he open about it? It seems like he's hiding his attempts to get food. He's sort of concealing his own emotional state and needs because he doesn't want to be a burden. He wants to uplift other people. So he's trying to manage the people in his life's emotions for their own sake, whether it's a matter of survival, like bullies and people who are a threat to him, or it's a matter of caretaking, where he's trying to take care of his parents when they can't take care of him.
Yeah. Sorry, what was the question there with that
I think it
statement? I
started as
just
a question and it got away from me.
yeah.
But is he the sort of person who just doesn't do a lot of open communication? He does a lot of
Oh
like
yeah.
emotional management of other people.
Yeah, so he'll try to do it if yeah, he'll try to do it internally, I think, a lot. At first, like, if it's really necessary and he, like, actually has, like, no idea what's going on, then, like, he will
Hmm.
try to, like, voice his questioning or voice his concerns, but
Hmm.
will, I think, as much as possible, try to just do it from a safe perspective, from a safe point, and then I
Hmm.
think that's kind of why that he's gotten relatively good at determining where people are at and whether it be, like, interacting with other people, just like in general, say like the running into like bullies and stuff. Like if someone seems like they're not gonna be a person to you'll like be easy to get along with, like you'll just avoid them
Hmm.
and kind of thing. So yeah, just tries to do it internally, but if necessary and with this person that he probably thinks it's like safe to, will then maybe like open up a little bit and try to have that like discourse and conversation.
Okay. Aside from listening to old Ramona's stories, what else does he like? What else does he enjoy doing? Like, what does he do anything for fun? Is there anything that like excites him or just brings joy to his life?
I would think what brings joy to his life. I think the times where he feels like he makes a connection with someone, like he doesn't really have the people that sees as like really close friends, but if he like has like a really like rewarding uh, rewarding exchange with somebody like another kid, like they have a good talk and they like maybe get a little bit closer, like he really enjoys that, and really enjoys like seeing the efforts of like his insight of somebody like come true.
Hmm.
I think in that regard. Does like to I think I mean the maps thing, he likes to like draw in maps and even like theory craft in some
Hmm.
kind of like places, like something he wants to like design things one day maybe. So he like draws out like maps of like fantastical like cities or locations that he's heard in like old Ramona's tales. So he'll just
Mhm.
like that's where all the maps everywhere come from, I think.
It's just whatever
Um,
his imagination tells him about those places. He's just doing some
yeah.
world building already in this fantasy world of his own.
Yes, exactly.
I love it. When he creates stories about far off places, when he fills in the gaps about places, what sort of places does he invent? What are they like? Because by all accounts, a lot of the stories he would hear, and he's a kid, kids get fragmented stories about things. You've heard about, the 10 dragon tribes of Okarthal, where they have powerful sorcerers descended from dragons and, the dragons rule them like wise gods, and no fiend would ever dare go near them. And they wear fine clothes and they hold their honor above all else. And, just these grand tales of heroism and honor. And then you've got these tales of the titans and the sovereigns smiting and building, and Vindor lives in his fantastic flying castle, and all these other, Sin has a great city of brass across the seas. All these sorts of tales. When it's not that, it's all crap. It's all crap. It's just not good. Um, there's an empire of like legionnaires, militaristic. They have an emperor, and they enslave anybody they conquer, and they sacrifice people on their altars daily in exchange for more power in war and more conquest. There are bands of raveners who wander the hills, just burning and eating anybody in their path, never stopping, with no home. These are some of the threats that are out there, that are the reasons why there's so many people in these camps. So the stories that young Alexander hears are all either high wonder or just grim dark awfulness. And also he lives in visual sight of one of the greatest magical places in the world.
Yeah.
So when he fills in the stories himself, what does he create? What are the stories he tells himself about?
Yeah, I think he tries to emulate a couple of things. One, he takes elements from all the stories, say like the ones about so like stories his mother would tell him about these like fantastical like sea creatures, but then he'll like just go further and be like, oh, where does this like sea creature like live? Like where did it come from? And like,
Hmm.
draw like a sea like lair where these like things like will make up like a kind of like life for them sort of thing. And but just like where they reside. I think also the like um, hmm, I think probably, like, dragon, like, caves as well, like, where do these like, I think he always has a fascination of, like, where things, like, come from. So while they are presented to him and, like, "Oh, these things have, like, done this," he wants to, like, get to, like, the root or, like, the core of it as to try to, like, understand them better. I think it's, like, the underlying, like, motives behind all of his, I guess, like, creative process, you could say.
So he takes the spots on the map, so they just drew fantastic stuff and said, "Here there be monsters," and he's like, "What's the inner life of the monsters? It's
Yeah,
the
like,
fantastic
where did
creatures. It's not the people. It's it's the wondrous monsters and entities that he doesn't encounter on a daily."
Mhm. Yeah, just and tries to, like, just understand more of, again, just, like, where they came from, and, like, well, in, like, the drawing the maps part, we'll just, like, say, like, "Oh, like, what's, like, a home of this thing look like?" And we'll
Hmm.
try to draw that out and, things like that. And sometimes he experiments, I think, with, like, drawing, a bit of, like, a more of the grim, like, dark scenes of, like, he'll like draw like a town or a city, maybe sometimes like the golden one that he's sees every time, and then he'll draw it like in like ruin or like as
Hmm.
if it's like been like destroyed, trying to entertain like that fantasy of like the what ifs that would happen, and
Let's
like what
hope
would it
he's
look like, what would that mean?
let's hope he's not a prophet. Um, all right. So, what would you say is his most valued possession? Is it the tools and the things that he uses to make his maps? Is there something else that
Yeah.
matters to him?
um I think so. I think that would probably be something that he holds dearly because he uses it very often. It's family ties as well. That'd
Hmm.
probably be his most yeah, his most prized, like, physical possession.
Okay. And has he established any meaningful relationships? He knows I think he knows lots of people. He knows
Yeah.
lots of kids, grown-ups, there's no, it's not like kids are together in school, right? They're just running around in the streets. So they're mingling with elders, they're mingling with other kids, folks of all levels of life. Aside from just knowing a ton of people because he is personable and he is agreeable, is there anyone else outside of his family that are meaningful relationships to him?
Yes, at least there was. I think there was probably maybe like 6 months or like a year ago or so. Um, there was a girl around his age, probably like a couple years older. And I think it was probably when Alexander was like trying to acquire some food. And maybe why he was so good at sleight of hand, maybe he was like stealing a bit of food from someone who maybe like had a bit too much sort of thing. And he was trying to locate it. And then when a young girl named Naomi probably like helped him out a little bit, and through that they started talking and they got closer and started like doing that again, and would figure out ways to just like acquire food or acquire things, or debate about the stories that they would hear old Ramona talk about. And I think Alexander would have probably regarded Naomi as his closest friend until one day Naomi and her family just left camp, disappeared without a trace. Like, he didn't know where she and her family went. Tried to ask around, people seemingly didn't know, but she would probably be like his closest friend, and feels kind of bad to like lose her.
So in the mornings, you and Naomi were running scams on grown-ups,
Yeah.
and then in the afternoons, you'd sit and eat whatever you'd managed to get, listen to old Ramona's stories, talk about far off places. I think that at some point, whether by accident, like she followed you, or you decided to let her into your trust, and I'll let you make this decision. She actually saw your maps. Was it
Okay.
by accident, or was it like something you wanted to share with her?
That's probably by accident. It
All
had to have
right.
been by accident. Yeah.
She was trying to find you. She was like, "Oh my god, they've got fish. We haven't had fish yet. We're miles away from any major body of water. Have you ever had fish? Let's go get some. What are you doing over there? What is all that?" Would Alexander be guarded about that? Embarrassed? Excited? How would he respond?
Yeah, probably very guarded. It's been like,
Mm.
"Oh, no, it's nothing," sort of thing. Probably just try to like steer the conversation elsewhere pretty quickly. Just try to like change the topic, like, "Oh, the fish, like where are the fish?"
I I don't think she'd let you off the hook on that. I think she'd be excited to see
Ah,
what you were doing because, as it turns out, after she either literally like pushes you aside and looks at your stuff, or just browbeats you, being an agreeable young kid that you are, into letting her see your stuff, she would show you that she's been painting old Ramona's stories. And
oh,
she doesn't have great supplies, much like you. She's had
yeah.
to, just bits and bobs and occasionally stealing some real paint, or at least something that can work as paint. But whereas you're mapping out the lives of these creatures, she's painting these scenes, and she's got some skill. She's a kid. She has no training, but like she's got the eye for it. She's drawn dragons, and she's drawn the Sovereign of the Skies, just looking like this very grumpy man with a big beard standing on a cloud. Uh, she's drawn some of the scarier things as well. Um, Uzul the Destroyer plunging his blood forged blade into the earth, shattering it open. Uh, but from then on out, for the few months after that, she was always excited to see what you were drawing, and she always wanted to show you. And
Yeah.
sometimes when you had an interesting idea about what dragon sea serpents do and how they live and where they are, she would draw these things. Your stories would get her excited, and she'd come back and she'd have the sea serpent and its clutch of nest of eggs in the, for some reason you designed an elaborate house for it to live in that time.
Yeah.
But she drew it. She got the whole thing there, and she's explaining all the pieces to you, and then you tell her your thoughts, and she's like, "Oh, I need to draw that next." And she had her hair tied in braids, and she always lived more on the west side of the camp. And there was a day when Ramona's stories were about the cupbearer of the gods, Ramius,
Mm.
the son of the earth, and how he used to take the blood of life and pour it out into the veins of any new creature that was born. Whenever a new life emerged, Ramius drew blood from the wells of life and poured it into their veins. But after his mother, Arakura, was slain by the Infernals, he vanished. And now life still emerges, but it's no longer blessed by the gods. And some of the people from the Zaylorian camp heard that story and did not like it at all. But Naomi was very, very excited about it. She wanted to draw this magic cup and this well of blood. You know, she always liked the sort of counter images of these fairy tale stories and then the gnarly metal stuff. She always
Yeah.
wanted both of them at the same time, and neither seems to diminish the other. And she wanted you to draw a map. What sort of map would he have drawn from this story?
Oh boy. That is a good question. What kind of map? I think so. Ramius being the cupbearer of the gods. I think you try to imagine like a massive like temple or like meeting place or something where it's kind of like I don't know, like a semicircle of like these big raised like chairs, and then like Ramius like going in and then um presenting whatever to these other like godlike figures, and just be like trying to draw this massive structure, like temple, cathedral kind of area. Um, yeah, I think that would be it.
All right. Um, she was really interested in what you were going to draw, and you sort of sat down and talked about your ideas. That thing that kids do, where it's like, no, it should be like this. No, I think it should be like this. A little bit of arguing, but then the excitement takes over, and she ran off and she was going to go paint it. And that was the last time that you ever saw her. And on that note, we have ourselves
Behold, an act of God.
It's like a fitting time.
deep reflection. What fascinating secrets are you hiding from yourself? This is a
Hmm.
bad omen. This is a bad omen. Oh, I
Uh-oh.
big fan. Big fan. Oh, I know what happened to her family. Okay.
Oh no. Oh no.
Unfortunately, though, you do not. You never
Yeah.
saw her again. And what would Alexander have done to try to find her? Because at first it's just, oh, she's not here and she said she would be here. But, you know, life is chaotic. That stuff happens.
Yeah, there's probably, it's likely for it to be a couple days where like, stuff happens, she wasn't around, but then when it starts becoming a trend would probably first because they saw each other a lot around old Ramona's stories, like her or the kind of square area, the town square where the well is, would ask old Ramona about it, and if didn't get anything there, would try to ask like the other kids that they interacted with sometimes, and he would get probably just like more and more just like confused but frustrated, because I think it's at the point where he like Alexander really felt close to Naomi is when she found his like maps and stuff, and that's when he finally like had a real like connection there that he was excited about. Like that would probably be the thing that Alexander was excited the most about. It was like sharing those like map ideas. Like she kind of understood him and like his um desires for like this creative side like on a deeper level. And so that's what like hurt the most. So he got like more frustrated with that. He like asked his like parents, probably like went and like just probably at one point just like searched the town, just like went like really far, like to I don't know how like big it is, but tried to
Mhm.
just like go and walk and just like ask people and talk and probably like got lost at some point, honestly, like
Yeah.
outside of the areas that he usually was, really good about traversing through, but just kind of just started going.
The only time it was on that day that Alexander was sad and lost and further from home than he'd ever been, and he knows the immediate vicinity of his family's home like the back of his hand. He's got detailed, accurate maps of it. He absolutely knows his patch. But he went well, and he kind of knows the areas beyond that, but he went
Yeah.
well, well beyond it
Hmm.
that day.
Yeah.
He walked through places where the smells of the food were completely things that he'd never even smelled before, never even seen. He heard even more languages, and he went through a part of town that the Ocarthal loyalists wearing the blue sashes, speaking Draconic, touting the virtues of the 10 dragon gods. They were in almost total control. Everybody there. There were tons of Dragonborn, almost like an enclave there, but people from other communities as well. But they were all wearing the traditional robe of the Vudazon tribe of Ocarthil, and they were all speaking Draconic and eating the traditional food. It was, again, an area that you've never been to before. And there's a lot more tension there, a lot more like anger, tension, excitement in the air. And you went beyond that to a twisted maze of alleyways and shanties at different odd angles that were so close together that the golden light that always emanates from IOTH Academy every hour of the day didn't even reach. And it was in that alleyway that you came across a door, not a door, an archway obscured by an old ratty curtain. And the smell of incense, this cloying, sickly sweet odor came out from it. And I don't think Alexander is Alexander the sort of person who would just kind of go in there to see if Naomi was in there, or would he be like, that's somebody's home, I'm not going in there? What would his boundaries on that be like?
I think normally his boundaries would be
Mm-hmm.
to not mess with like that's somebody's home, but having, just kind of wit and is feeling kind of like almost like desperate at this point, just like to find out something,
Mm-hmm.
like that would, I think, drive him to at least like peek, like kind of, pull the curtain aside a little bit and like peek in and kind of gauge the situation from there. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's not fully just like YOLO mode right now, but definitely is like more focused on just like the task at hand of finding her.
As you passed by, maybe you were going to leave it for a moment, but out of the corner of your eye, through the gap between the archway and the tattered curtain, you swear you saw her for just a moment. Again, you were just passing
Yeah.
over and she was there. And that's enough to get you in parting or peering through the curtain. But when you look inside, you see yourself looking back at you in the frame of a large, the biggest mirror you've ever seen in your life, with a dark oak frame standing there in a room poorly lit. There's an oil lamp on the table, an incense stick, um, some odd bells and chimes lying around, bric-a-brac, so on and so forth. But even though for a moment you thought you saw her, it's just a mirror and it's just you.
It'd feel really, really disappointed at that, having, maybe some glimmer of hope of Naomi, and probably would try to look around the room, call out, be like, Naomi? Naomi? Are you here? I thought," and it just like would call out and look around at this point, being like confused and, having that like little spark of hope, but having it being something else completely.
Your voice falls flat in a way that would be very unfamiliar to Alexander, but quite familiar to anybody who's ever been into a recording booth which has the really, really nice soundproofing and it's just like no echo. And it's just dead quiet in there. No response whatsoever.
Tried to see if this room is just that one room or if there's like any other like doorways, passageways, anywhere besides
Mhm.
the entrance to where he came in?
Yeah, in a chamber just behind basically a wicker mat, is a very small. This whole building is essentially adobe, like layered mud that's been turned into a home. There's a very small alcove with a cot, just a cot, nothing fancy to it. Uh, no food lying around. One threadbare sheet to cover. No pillows. Uh, there's a pair of shoes, old, tattered.
I think at that point, Alexander would he knows this to have like through his whole day of searching, knows this to be like even if it's nothing at this point, the closest thing that he had of maybe finding her. So is probably just gonna go like stand out by the front of this place, like
Mm-hmm.
upon it after like inspecting it, just gonna go sit out by the front of it, like outside the little curtain, and just like sit and wait for somebody to come back home to here,
Mm-hmm.
or to like just yeah to come back to there. I think maybe thinking like it somehow will relate to Naomi or help him find her.
Mm-hmm. It is hours go by of him just sitting there. This is the only spark of hope that he's seen, and from his only friend that he's really known this entire time, the only person who's ever gotten close to him. And as those hours go by, the incredibly rare desert rain begins to come down. There's thunder in the sky, and the monsoons just hit. The rain pounds down on 1,000 rooftops across the way. Most of them simple, just sticks lathered together with maybe some mud or straw, uh, planks of wood from far away, and water drips through most of the homes as it goes on. And the sun goes down, and the golden light, the faint golden light that emanates from IOTH Academy, sort of takes over the alleyway, waiting for anybody to come by. It is not until the sun is all the way down and that spark of hope that was kindled just a little while ago is dwindling and dwindling, and Alexander is clinging to it as if with white knuckles in his heart, that a troop of men come by. Just 3 men walk by. They have sticks. There aren't a lot of weapons in the camp, just not a lot of metal to go around. They have sticks and they're wearing blue sashes. And what are you doing out in this awful weather, boy?
Um, I was looking for my friend Naomi. Have you seen her?
No idea who that is. You're going to catch sick if you stay out here.
I but I have to find her.
We haven't seen anybody this entire day. How far are you from your home?
I like this point is like I think when Alexander is finally realizing that like usually when he's going places he like keeps track like of
Mm-hmm.
like the logistics of like where he's going and is able to, but then he's kind of like realizing like I've gone pretty far. So he like goes like I'm not that well maybe a little far, just it's back that way just a bit.
No one lives here except an old woman, and she's not been seen for days. She's probably never coming back. Good riddance.
Hmm. Oh, all right. I I still want to wait here for her.
Nobody's coming.
But what if she does? You don't know that. Maybe she'll walk by
Roll
soon.
roll an insight check.
All right. 14.
14. All right. You are used to grown-ups all kinds, and you know that these blue sash wearing Dragon Tribe loyalists, they like to take charge. They like to act, as if they know what's going on. Of the three, one is irritated, one is suspicious, and one is just sad. It's a very familiar to that man, a very familiar sadness, the kind of sadness he's seen 1,000 times, the kind of sadness that your parents have seen 1,000 times, the sadness that comes with tragedy after loss, after hard truth, with no answer in sight and no choice but to just suck it up.
I think Alexander would try to he'd try to want to appeal to the sad one, thinking that there must be like some kind of way to like get some kind of information, like something, and he would kind of just like he would act like he's like done, kind of like put his head down sort of thing, but then like peek up and just like see their reactions, like see if like a couple of them are trying to like walk away, like see what the sad one's trying to do, just like gauge their response if he seems like he's just kind of done with the situation, because he also doesn't want to like annoy the irritable one.
Okay, roll a persuasion check for me.
Sure. 8.
8. All right. You're getting very clear, get this kid off of my turf vibes from the other two.
Yeah.
And the sad one is going to take point from them to make sure that they aren't just, poking you with a stick until you leave, and says, do you have parents? Do you have family?
I do, yeah.
And they're probably as worried for you as you are for your friend. Let's get you back home to them.
Kind of like a heavy, like dejected sigh. He'll like start to nod and then ask, have you ever lost someone you couldn't find?
He hesitates for a moment and then nods. Everyone here has, kid. Everyone has.
Oh. If you see her and you're by the square by old Ramona, I might be there sometimes. Could you tell me?
He nods. Roll insight.
12.
All right. That was a heavy nod. But you're not really able to discern much more than that. He says, is that where you live, by the square?
Just kind of nods. Just a quick little nod.
If anybody ever comes asking for you around the place, we'll make sure we knock on your door. Now, take us to it. Time for you to go home.
Okay.
The other two, you chose Draconic as your language, right?
Yeah.
All right, one of the other ones says, we've got no time for this whelp. If you want to busy yourself, that's fine. I'm going back on patrol. I'm going back for some food. This is all in Draconic, and they clearly don't think that you can understand them.
Yeah. Even if you can't catch all the words, probably gets the gist of it from that. Yeah.
Boredom, hunger, universal concepts.
I think that Alexander is finally about to be like, all right, like, sure, whatever, I'll like give up. But then hearing that kind of like annoys him. And then I think Alexander would just, go to start like walking towards his home, but then just take off, just like run, just like start darting into like other alleyways and stuff, being like, you know what, this search is not over, kind of thing, like internally, like I'm gonna find her.
All right. They yell after you as you run, as if now the fact that you're running subtly means that they, it's a cause for them to pay attention.
Yeah.
But you're too quick, and even though you don't know this area, you're good at navigating little crawl spaces and getting away from grown-ups, and soon their shouts are lost in the pounding monsoon rains. We both know that you don't find Naomi that night. So how does the night end for Alexander?
I think Alexander eventually, after he knows he's lost the trail of those individuals, he'd circle back to that same like hovel with the mirror
Mm-hmm.
and go inside there and probably just like maybe cry a little bit that he didn't find Naomi and probably
Mm-hmm.
just like cry himself to sleep in that little place
All right.
on the cot.
Hours later, he's awakened to minor flooding in the area. Like a thin layer of water has splashed up. Some of the hovels have fallen down. The morning is messy. Uh, and there's folk picking through, like he's awakened by noise as there's folk picking through the hovel that he's in. They're just like taking stuff.
Do they seem to have spotted Alexander?
Roll a stealth check.
All right.
14.
14.
No, not yet.
Okay. He'll just stay still and
Mm-hmm.
see what these people continue to do, like what they're and it'll try to take note of like what they're grabbing. Is it just like valuables? Is it like
Mm-hmm.
anything specific kind of thing? Like,
Just, I mean, valuables. There's not really any food left over. They're kind of complaining about, she didn't keep anything nice in here at all. No food, no nothing. Just whatever this is, they grab the incense holder and just stuff it into a sack that it's not even a sack. It's just like a piece of burlap, a flat piece of burlap that they're holding to make a sack. Just grabbing whatever they can. They comment on the mirror like it's big. That's got to be expensive, but who's gonna buy that?
yeah.
It's not food.
Probably just try to keep very still
Mm-hmm.
and just wait for them to leave.
All right. They loot the whole place and just roll a d20 for me, a flat d20.
Sure. 2.
2. Okay. On the way out, they knock over the mirror and it shatters into 1,000 pieces, and they scamper as the pieces splash into the thin layer of water. The sun has returned. The monsoons hit hard and then they leave. So the sun is out again, and it's very muggy and humid as the water that's just deluged the place is beginning to evaporate. But now the water is filled with just 1,000 broken pieces of glass, and the mirror is face down in the water.
Oh man. Okay. Eh, After they leave, shattered the mirror. I think Alexander see if he could just like pick up a piece of the mirror because
Mm-hmm.
he wanted to before he left, like just look in it again because that's like where he saw like the what looked like the reflection of like where Naomi was, and so it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like holding out some hope that maybe somehow some random weird fantastical thing would happen and she'd come out of the mirror or something. But
Mm-hmm.
now that hope has kind of been destroyed by these people. But wants
All
to
right.
take, I think, a piece of the mirror just anyway, and
Well, you
with
see,
it try to make his way back.
it's a big
I
chunk.
would look at it,
It's
yeah.
enough for you to see your face. You've been out. You were up way late last night. You were out in the rain, and you cried yourself to sleep. You look haggard. You do not look happy right now.
Yeah,
It's a
that,
face without much hope.
that's how he's feeling. So with that piece of mirror, we'll take it and start trudging his way through all the water, through the flooding, back towards home.
You don't get back home until late afternoon, and your parents, Miranda and Arthas, are absolutely beside themselves. They thought you died in the flooding. Like there were some collapses nearby. They were so worried for you. You get yelled at a little bit, but their hearts aren't in it. They're glad you're there. They're just relieved, desperate and relieved that you're okay. So yeah, you're in trouble, but it's not like discipline has ever been particularly heavy in this household.
Yeah.
That was the last time you ever saw Naomi. That was the last time you ever saw old Ramona. She disappeared that night as well. And with both of them gone, and in the days to come, the people of your community just rebuilding from this monsoon that struck. There's not a lot to look forward to. There's nobody comes to talk about your maps and tell stories with you. Nobody is out there to give you new ideas for your maps out in the town center. And in the rebuilding process, the tension in the camp rises. People are desperate, people are angry. The wizards send out another grand procession, and with their magic, they start to clear away the waters and repair homes and put in new roofs that are waterproof. But the camp is massive. And the wizards are relatively few. They're going to make a difference over time, but there are vast, vast swaths in entire communities that are going to have to wait who knows how long before any help arrives. And in the 6 months that pass between then and the true beginning of our story, the dragon loyalists begin to band together. They get more people to say, hey, band with us. We're going to rebuild your home for you. Just live by our ways and put faith in the draconic mysteries. And the worshippers of Zalar, the sun god, do the same on their side. And the arguments where once you had old Ramona telling her stories to children in the street with the grown-ups sort of glowering from the sides, now you've just got the grown-ups, each of them getting up there having loud arguments, praising the greatness of the Sun Rider, or extolling the virtues of the draconic mysteries. And over the next 6 months, things get worse, and the fighting gets more intense. It goes from yelling to the occasional fist flying, and once, shortly before we catch up with the modern time, there's an open fight in the streets, an all-out melee, with people on both sides drawing whatever weapons they had. No glorious shining swords and maces and spears, but tools and clubs, and there's a massive, just a brawl breaks out. During the brawl, the wizards show up real fast this time. Took them a while to show up after the flood, but they show up real fast. And it's one of the most wondrous things you've ever actually seen in your life. An 8-foot tall minotaur with gray, shaggy fur, a large scar across his face. His horns are capped with metal and covered with inscriptions, and rings of iron and silver hang from them. He wears the robes of a wizard of IOTH, and he carries in his hand a war staff, a massive, solid piece of wood capped with metal with bumps on top of it. You've never seen a weapon like this. You know exactly what that's for. That's for clobbering. Shortly after the brawl erupts, this minotaur pops out of seemingly nowhere. You have no idea where he came from. He hits his staff on the ground and he roars, and the sound pushes everybody off their feet, knocks them onto the ground. That's how the fight ended. And for a few days, there are more wizards around, keeping the peace, monitoring things. But when kids get into trouble and the grown-ups stop them, sometimes they feel bad and listen. Sometimes they just find new ways to get what they want. And the grown-ups they're not openly fighting anymore, but the tension is still palpable in the area. What is Alexander's life like during these 6 months after both Naomi and Ramona vanish?
He's generally just, obviously a lot more sad, probably stays just inside a lot. I think tries to escape in the only way he knows how, which is just going to be within stories and drawings. And for a time would grow interested in seeing this minotaur, and I think tried to just he would ask his parents why is there so much more fighting now and stuff, and but generally just I think keep to himself. Recognizes obviously he's an insightful kid, recognizes that people are a lot more generally angrier, so it's not safe out there, and stay inside, stay home, and just try to think about other things.
And on a particularly bad night, after a particularly boring day, as one blends into the other, without stories or friends to help tell the passage of time, staying largely indoors, it all just sort of melds together, and there's less and less reason to go out and explore and do things because you're just going to run into more of the fighting. And your parents try to explain to you that when people are in hard times, they turn to whatever strength or purpose they can find, and sometimes that's turning against other people. And you sleep restlessly that night. And you awaken at odd hours. You have no idea what time it is. To hear a whispered argument between your parents. Roll a perception check real quick for me.
All right. Perception. 16.
16. You catch a lot of the conversation. It's hushed. They clearly think that you're asleep.
Yeah.
They're worried about the fighting. They think the fighting's just going to get worse. They are angry. They're so angry, but it's not a kind of anger that can do anything. They're trapped. They are worried about you. They're talking about you and how ever since, Ramona vanished, he's just been, tired and sad and has nothing to look forward to. And this is no life. This is no life for our son to live. We have nothing. What could we possibly give him? And that is when your father says, any price. Any price. And your mother goes quiet. Whispers through her raspy voice, through a throat that was cut on the high seas many years ago. All right. And we'll find out what that means in about 6 minutes when we return. Don't go anywhere, folks. Book of Dawn IOTH Academy will be back.